Hello and welcome to my channel. This is Miss Happy Catholic, Mrs. Happy Catholic's channel, and today I'm talking with Tony from Arizona. How are you doing today, Tony?
Doing good. How about yourself?
Awesome. Yeah, it's good to have you on. This is our first video together, but we're already planning some more, so stay tuned and keep praying for us that we can fit it into our crazy parent lives. So anyway, here we are today. Tony and I met through YouTube. He was commenting on some of my videos, and then we sort of ended up on the tradrecovery.com site together and interacting there, and got to talking and getting to know each other. And he shared these 3 papers that he wrote with me about the 3 issues that the SSPX has with the Vatican II documents about religious liberty, ecumenism, and collegiality. And so he wrote them in a series, like they're numbered, but the last one was collegiality, and you kind of had your little like summary statement at the end there. And I just loved it. I loved all the papers. They were great. They're so scholarly and well-sourced and organized. And but you're a paralegal, right, Tony? So you're putting your legal mind to work here for the church. It's great. And so I just wanted to let people know about these papers. We have them up on our tradrecovery.com site, so you can click and view them or download them if you need to print them or something. Tony goes in all these different related church documents, past and present, and the Vatican II documents themselves, and lines up the argument that the SSPX makes, and then what did Vatican II really say, and what was the context, and what was all the previous magisterial teaching related to it that some feel seems to refute it. That Vatican II is departing from tradition by what it taught, and is that true or not? And then you examine those and you draw a conclusion. And so that's kind of how the papers go. And anyway, so I'm curious how you came to write those papers, Tony.
You made me sound very important. Way more important than I actually am. I appreciate that. So yeah, before I met my wife, not any exposure to traditionalism in general. I think I may have heard the term extraordinary form before. Didn't really mean anything to me at that point. I met my wife online, actually. A lot of online meetings going on these days. In 2014, I discovered not long after we started dating, she was coming to Phoenix, and we were talking about where to go to Mass. And I figured, well, let's just go to my current parish. And she suggested the Society parish, the local one. First indication that it was a bit of an unusual circumstance was when I didn't see the parish listed on the diocesan website, and I asked her about it, and she said, well, it's the SSPX. So I had assumed wrongly, as it turned out, that they were a sedevacantist group, and like a moron, I told her, they're a sedevacantist group. I don't think we should do them. And she was like, no. So I figured out pretty quickly that they were not sedevacantists. So that was kind of my, okay, maybe I should learn about them a little bit before I start saying stupid stuff like that. Oh
no.
So I got my first exposure to them. Their family has significant ties to them. Her uncle is a prior at her hometown Society church, and got to know that circle very, very well, and all very dear to me, all very dear friends of mine. And so I didn't really start diving into the debates between the two until around the time that we got engaged. I figured, well, it's probably time to start figuring out where the difference is. And leading up to our marriage, we had conversations not only with the Society, but also with the diocese, both of Phoenix and El Paso. And I figured, like I had heard that Pope Francis had just recently allowed a provision that would allow Society priests to receive delegation for marriage. So I was like, oh, okay, well, there's the avenue that I was hoping for. So we kept in constant communication with our dioceses, and apparently we got the faculties granted, at last I heard from the prior at the Society of Church in El Paso, he said that they had been approved. So we got married and started going into much more greater detail about it. I read kind of the basic society literature that everyone says you should read. So I reviewed Open Letter to Confused Catholics, Apologia per Marcella Feb that Michael Davies wrote. I think I probably looked at the Ottaviani intervention at one point. And I went on a 12-part marathon of Father Stephen McDonald's SSPX frequently asked question videos, figuring, all right, well, between the Open Letter to Confused Catholics, what I read, and those videos, I figured I'd get a pretty good idea of what the society stood for and where they kind of stood on the spectrum. And obviously it became apparent very quickly that the issue was Vatican II. And obviously the Mass is a big sore point, and we'll probably go into more depth on that one in a later video. But the three that they seem to focus on the most was ecumenism, religious liberty, and collegiality. And prior to all of this debates, probably like most Catholics, I had never read the Vatican II documents. In keeping with classic Alonji, we got to be right about everything. I wanted to make sure that I did my due diligence before I settled in one camp or the other, because after all, I grew up as a kind of nominal Catholic. We went to our local diocesan parish, grew to love it very, very much. And for me, that was basically Catholicism. The Mass was a Mass, and didn't really get into the liturgy wars all that much until now. So
you're talking about why you decided to dive in and start doing all this research to really get to the bottom of it. Because you're like, well, I mean, I can read the arguments for or against, but what's really going on here? Like, what does it have to show when you dig into it?
Yeah, it wasn't the first time that I've done it. I met some friends a while back who were atheists, and that was kind of my first, the first group of friends that I made outside of my Catholic circle. And they went into great detail about atheism. And I figured, well, if I'm going to understand where they're coming from, I should probably read some atheist literature. So I don't know if The God Delusion by Professor Richard Dawkins necessarily applies. It's more pop literature than kind of the high-minded literature that you might find from the great atheistic philosophers. So, but I figured it'd give me a pretty good idea of what most atheists probably thought about religion at the time. So it seemed basic. You know, if you want to learn about atheism, you should read atheist literature. And my approach to the SSPX was really no different. I wanted to read their literature, and well, if their biggest problem was Vatican II, I should probably read the Vatican II documents. I got my chance to really sit down with them during the year that the pandemic broke out. And I was looking for a Lenten sacrifice or so, something to do during Lent. And I thought, you know, I hadn't read the Vatican II documents. I think that should be my Lenten penance, to kind of sit down with all these documents, read them back to back times 16, because there are 16 of them.
Oh, right.
It was about halfway through the Easter season when I finally finished reading all 16 of them. It took all of Lent and a few weeks after Easter before I finished all of them. And after that, I was like, you know, I should probably collect all my thoughts about all this so I can see them all laid out and then maybe come to a conclusion about them. So that's where these papers kind of originated.
Oh, that's cool. Okay. Yeah, I think they're really good. I mean, very, very professional, and yeah, just very clearly thought out. You're not going into it with an agenda. I mean, I could tell that you're just simply saying, you know, the Vatican II documents say this, the SSPX holds that is an error or a departure from tradition in this way, and now we'll examine that. Then you go into it point by point. And is the first paper on ecumenism, right?
That's right.
Okay. So why'd you decide to start with ecumenism?
I think only because it happened to be the first topic that they broached on the frequently asked question videos, Father McDonald.
Okay.
I don't know. It seemed like a logical place to start.
Yeah.
So I tried to approach all of these papers the way a judge writes their final order. As a paralegal, I read a lot of legal documents.
Yeah.
And at that point, I can quickly learn the difference between a writer who knows what they're talking about and a writer that copies and pastes a lot of high-minded stuff to look fancy, but then you can see their original writing and you get the idea that you don't really write all that well, do you? You just put all this high-minded stuff in to look more important than you really are. So I really wanted to avoid that with these. That's why I did all the reading beforehand.
Okay.
So, and how these orders usually work is the judge lays out the facts of the case, what each side says, and they list out their observations, their findings, and then they put their final orders at the very end. So I try to approach each of these topics a lot like that one.
Oh, cool. Yes. So do you want to kind of give us maybe an overview of each one and sort of what you learned in your examination of the topics so we can kind of get a taste?
Cool. Okay, yeah, we'll start with ecumenism. So it was either a two-parter or a one-parter, but Father McDonald basically talked about the modernist heresies, and he compared what he saw, or what the society sees. I assume it's their official position because it's on their official YouTube channel with an official society priest making very official statements about some very official documents. So I know that, I know that not every society priest or bishop or even faithful necessarily falls and agrees on every single one of these, but I figured, yeah, there's that, and then there's their official position. And I figure if they're going to put something like this on their YouTube channel, I think it's pretty safe to say that it's their official position. So
yeah, you'd have to see that corrected or refuted somewhere, but I would agree with you. That would make sense to me.
Yeah, and I haven't seen any contradictory statement from any other priest in any meaningful sense, as it were. So in the absence of any contradiction, I basically start with that. So they basically compared Catholicism and modernism. In terms of ecumenism, they said that Christianity is the one true religion revealed directly by God. All teachings come from God himself and therefore are free of all falsehood, and that the Catholic Church has the duty and responsibility to teach these teachings and encourage people to abandon error and embrace truth for the sake of their souls. And yeah, that's more or less the truth. And then he compared modernism, which held, and St. Pius X talked about this in Pascendi Dominici Gregis. I apologize if I'm butchering Latin, but bear with me.
No, you're good.
But reading that one actually helped too for this. And he said that in modernism, the way St. Pius X defined it, religious knowledge comes from within as opposed to externally. And that is a modernist error when you believe that religious understanding is basically comes from our mind. So basically we create reality as opposed to reality being an external reality created by God.
Okay.
So Father McDonald is making the point that religious knowledge comes from man rather than God. That's what modernism says. And he said that because of that, every religion is supposed to be considered good because they all come from within. And that through dialogue and mutual respect, all religions of the world basically come together for the sole end of only just understanding and promoting peace and compromise, and not in terms of finding the truth in the sense of, let's all just get along kind of thing, live and let live, and not really have any concern for the truth, but rather just like, as long as everybody's hunky-dory, then we're all hunky-dory. And
right.
That's
everything's equal. It's all subjective. That's what modernists say and believe. Okay.
Yeah, more or less according to St. Pius X. And they saw a lot of what they claimed was modernism in Vatican II documents. They claimed that Lumen Gentium, Nostra Aetate, and Unitatis Redintegratio all taught basically that all religions were good, or things like that.
Huh.
And what I found out very quickly is that when reading the actual Vatican II documents, the way the society defines ecumenism is not quite the way it should be defined. In the context of the Vatican II documents, ecumenism refers only to Christian unity, as an ecumenical, the church, and all the individual churches. So the original understanding of the term was back before the schism and the Protestant Reformation, because an ecumenical council, that's where that term comes from, is all of the churches getting together to chart their path forward together with the guidance of the Holy Spirit. So that's where ecumenism comes from.
Okay.
So in the Vatican II documents, they mostly that word anyway refers to Christian unity and not religious unity overall. Okay. As a matter of fact, the words ecumenism and ecumenical don't even appear in Nostra Aetate, which is another argument they bring up. But you can kind of gather that they kind of have an issue with Nostra Aetate along those lines, because in that document, it's simply looking for the seeds of truth in other religions. So they kind of take that as, oh, it's saying that all these religions are good, when in fact, only Christianity is good and all the other religions are not. So
interesting that they have an issue with the church looking at something and identifying that it has a good point. And then the society sort of like, they just get so nervous, like the church is baptizing the whole darn thing. And it's like, whoa, well, can't you do that? Can't you look at anybody's actions or anything anywhere and say, well, what you're going for is good, but the way you're going about it isn't good? And
well, according to go ahead.
Oh, you're good. That was
well, according to St. John Henry Newman, that's how the church proves itself as the one true church, because of its ability to take what is true through the world and baptize it, as it were, to use his word. And
but only what is actually good and true, not everything around it. Of course.
Exactly.
That would be,
so it has a way of taking what is true and beautiful and good in every religion and baptizing it and repurposing it as a Catholic, in a Catholic context. That's what they were able to do with the Roman temples and Roman religious practices when Christianity became the dominant religion in the Roman Empire. A lot of the pagan temples were Christianized, as it were. They weren't just all burned to the ground and whatnot. They were repurposed, and given a Christian purpose. Things like incense, I believe. They were a Hebrew custom too, but they were also pagan as well, because incense was kind of seen as a reflection of like prayers going up to the heavens. But yes, going back to ecumenism. So we look at what Vatican II actually taught in Lumen Gentium. They make it very clear that the church itself was established and continues to be sustained by Christ. And through that church, one with visual delineation, as it were, a visual component, truth and grace are communicated to all. And that the visible and invisible components of the church, they are not separate realities, but one complex reality that mirrors God, who likewise was fully divine and fully human. That's where it's part of our creed. Invisible and visible and invisible.
Yeah.
So just as her spouse is visible and invisible, the church is also visible and invisible. And in Mortalium Animos that Pius XI wrote, that's what he was saying when he was speaking against the idea that the church can be invisible. And he said that was impossible because the church has to be visible.
Right.
So that's what Lumen Gentium is saying here, and that the one reality is the church, is the one Church of Christ. Note that they say is the one Church of Christ. They say subsists in the Catholic Church later, but a few paragraphs beforehand, they do say that that one reality is the one Church of Christ. So there is no confusion that the one reality that mirrors God is the Catholic Church, professed as one holy Catholic apostolic, shepherded by Peter, directed by the apostles, and erected for all ages as, quote, the pillar and mainstay of the truth. It's really hard to read into that all religions are good.
Yeah.
I am sorry, but I cannot read that into that. It seems pretty unambiguous.
Right. I got the same thing reading that text. I mean, and it's so helpful to have you put them side by side, because you're like, okay, this is what the society sees in this document. Then you read it and you're like, where did they get that? Like, if you were looking for it and you were determined to make certain things mean certain things to prove your point, well, I guess, but that's not reality. That's not really how it is. So, I mean, over and over, I was seeing that, but you made it so easy to see that by giving the context. And yeah, reading the documents themselves, it's definitely not a waste of time, because they're sure talked about enough. It's like, well, let's know what we're talking about if we're going to talk about this.
And I know they point to subsistence as a proof that the church is maybe starting to soften that stance a little bit, but it's really hard to read that intention in that context. And I know that Father Pagliarini, the current superior general of the SSPX, was talking about the Vatican II documents at some point. He said that they are surrounded by traditional statements, but they are basically window dressing to serve as a vehicle for delivering error. And the problem I had with that statement is it can't be window dressing if it's the exact point that the documents are trying to make. It would be window dressing if it basically set up what traditional theologians and saints have said throughout the course of the church history, and then said, having said that, all religions are good and true. But that's not what the Lumen Gentium says. It says that the one reality that mirrors her divine spouse is the one Church of Christ, professed as one holy Catholic and apostolic. So again, kind of hard to read that all religions are good when the primary point of that paragraph says completely differently.
Right. And then also in those documents, it says that when the church is looking at other religions and recognizes something good in them, that belongs to her because she is the keeper of all truth. And so it's like, you have this in common with us, but it comes from the source of truth, which is God, and the church is the guardian of truth. And so it's like, that's where the unity can come in, because we have something to build on with those people. So recognizing that isn't a waste of time, and it's not condoning everything they have wrong.
Yeah, indeed. It even says in Nostra Aetate that the Catholic Church rejects nothing that is true and holy in other religions. It doesn't say the church accepts all religions. It says it accepts what is true and holy in other religions. So that 1%, 5%, 10%, the part that it can baptize and make it its own, essentially.
Yeah. Cool.
Which is very different from saying that the entire religion is good.
Yeah, right.
So, like, for example, when it says Hindus contemplate the divine mystery, that's a good thing. Catholics are supposed to contemplate the divine mystery too. Buddhists recognize the insufficiency of the world and follow a way by which they might be able to attain supreme illumination. Catholics are called to do that too. They realize that there's more beyond this world and that it's not enough, that we are not made for this world, but we are made for God. That's true enough.
Yeah.
Right. And Muslims adore the one merciful and all-powerful God, linking themselves in Abraham in submission to God. Again, that's kind of what we're supposed to do too. I mean, even though they reject Jesus as God, which that's the part of Islam we should object, we should take from it the idea that we should be submissive to God. So as Catholics, that's something we could take from them without running afoul of thinking that Jesus is not God. I mean, again, it's taking what is true and recognizing it, saying that that could be an example for Catholics to follow without accepting all of it. Yeah. And again, it's really hard to read this document, read into it, that it's saying that the entire religion is good. And again, it talks about the Jews. It does point out what that they don't accept the gospel, which Catholics are called to do. But it does point out that we are linked together through our common spiritual patrimony, which is true.
Yeah,
which is true.
Right. Yeah. If you're going to try to cultivate unity with someone or to bring them closer to God and the fullness of truth, the way to start doing that is not by pointing out your differences and emphasizing them, being like, whoa, you guys, you are messed up over here. And we got to figure that out first. That's how it sounds when traditionalists that I've heard talk about, the other religions and the errors that they have. It's like, holy cow, this is just like, it's like a billboard all over them. And that it's like they can't see past it. And I'm like, well, okay, but at some point you're going to have to get over the fact that they're different from you or that they are mistaken, because that's not going to draw them closer. It's going to push them farther away. So that's why the church has to talk about it like this, because that's the church's job, is to bring all men to Christ. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, you don't make any friends by telling them all the ways they're wrong.
Ding.
I mean, like, I'm an Olanji. I don't like being told I'm wrong. So my first instinct is to be like, I'm not listening to you. Bye. Talk to the hand. So
you're not alone.
It's a human thing. Nobody likes hearing that they're wrong about everything.
Yeah, right. And the church has been in the business of converting the world to Christ since its inception 2,000 years ago. So I think the church has a pretty good system down for knowing how that's to be done. And then for some organization that just popped up 50 years ago, or, to say that the church is leading us down a wrong path and doesn't know what she's talking about when she's addressing the subject, it's kind of presumptuous. I mean, just from a very objective level, I would say it's like, we're really wet behind the ears here. You better be sure you know what you're talking about before you go off and die on that mountain.
Yeah. I mean, out of all the components of the Catholic Church, the one that has been promised the guarantee of infallibility, which is different from impeccability, is the Rock of Peter. That is the only component of the church that has that charism of infallibility. The Pope and the bishops who teach in concert with him. So I don't remember your average pop Catholic YouTube channel having the mark of infallibility. I mean, nothing I'm saying here is infallible. So if what I'm saying is fallible and it runs afoul of what the church actually taught, then, well, I expect the church to call me out on it.
Yeah.
So don't take my word for it. I'm not the Pope, and I'm married, so there's really no chance of that. I don't know why anyone would,
unless you transition rights, but no plans for that, right?
I have a hard enough time keeping track of a flock of 3.
Isn't that the truth? Woo.
I've heard it once said that Catholics put the word cat in Catholicism. It's basically the job of the Pope is basically herding 1 billion cats, and really all that implies.
He would probably agree with you.
Yeah, he probably would. Especially Pope Benedict, because he was a big cat person.
Oh, he was? I don't think I knew that.
Yeah, he loved cats.
Wow, cool. Well, that's good. Fortunate for us, I guess.
I'm a dog person, so I can't relate. But
I know.
My dad and sister are big cat people, so they probably.
Oh, okay. Well, it takes all kinds. So. All right. Yeah. So going on with ecumenism here.
Yeah. And I mean, the church has always pointed out what is good and true in all religions, even going back to St. Justin Martyr and what he said about the seeds of truth. He would say, I believe it was his first apology. He said that, and whatever both philosophers and poets have said concerning the immortality of the soul, or punishments after death, or contemplation of things heavenly, or doctrines of the like mind, they have received such suggestions from the prophets as have enabled them to understand and interpret these things. And hence they seem to be seeds of truth among all men, but they are charged with not accurately understanding the truth when they assert contradictories. So again, like, all men understand at least a modicum of the truth, even if they don't possess the fullness of it. The church is the only one that can claim to that. And Lumen Gentium says that too. The fullness of the truth subsists in the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Perfect sense.
Right.
St. John Henry Newman, in an essay on the development of Christian doctrine, which is a book that every Catholic should read if they want to understand tradition, a Catholic understanding of tradition, he would say that, and wherever she went, in trouble or in triumph, she was a living spirit, the mind and voice of the Most High, sitting in the midst of the doctors, both hearing them and asking them questions, claiming to herself what they said rightly, correcting their errors, supplying their defects, completing their beginnings, expanding their surmises, and thus gradually, by means of them, enlarging the range and refining the sense of her own teachings. That's essentially what Vatican II was doing. It was expanding and refining her teachings.
Yeah.
They were never contradicting her past teachings, but they were expanding and
yes. He does a really good job of summarizing that. That is a great quote to have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. I mean, we have plenty of past statements from the popes explaining, like, with a whole list of what we shouldn't do, the syllabus of errors. I mean, look at that if you want, all the things that are wrong. But saying what is right and true in other religions is expanding on it. Then you have a balanced approach, a nuanced approach to other people. And what better way to evangelize, obviously by listening and understanding people and where they're coming from, but understanding a good starting point to have a great conversation about. Even if nothing comes from it, it's still like something anyone can bond over. Like if you have a Buddhist friend, you go to them, you talk about all the ways that we feel like there's more to this life than just the world, and the longing to kind of rid themselves of the things of the world. That's something Buddhists and Catholics can talk about and share a cup of coffee over.
Yeah, right. Yes, I think that's great. Well, another thing that I noticed in the different quotes and stuff of that paper was that the society's definition, they're kind of talking about dialogue and compromise, like they necessarily include each other. Like you can't have dialogue without consequently compromising. And it's like, wait, no. I mean, the church promotes dialogue, but never does it say compromise. Dialogue is just engaging with the other person, hearing them, like you just said, listening. And, then you take a turn and they listen to you. If you're open to that and you're both going to sit there, you're going to actually hear each other and what you're saying and be able to start connecting the dots. And it'll get you somewhere, at least to being more bonded in that. Look at all these things we were able to talk about that we agree on. Maybe we didn't even realize that. And that's something that's achieved by dialogue that wouldn't happen if you didn't sit down and have that conversation, if you didn't have an openness to each other that would allow that conversation. That doesn't take you anywhere near compromise. So you just have to be careful, like that they're saying that like those two go hand in hand, and they don't. They're completely different. And that's not what the church is condoning.
Yeah. Yeah. And even Pope Francis, when he was in his address welcoming the leaders of the Lutheran World Federation in 2021, he was saying ecumenism is not an exercise of ecclesial diplomacy. I'm going to say it word for word because I like quoting him directly because not a lot of people do that.
Thank you.
For ecumenism is not an exercise of ecclesial diplomacy, but a journey of grace. It depends not on human negotiations and agreements, but on the grace of God, which purifies memories and hearts, overcomes attitudes of inflexibility, and directs toward renewed communion, not toward reductive agreements or forms of Irenic syncretism, but toward a reconciled unity amid differences, not toward reductive agreements. I would like to take that statement and stamp it as much as I can across every single website that claims that he's saying all religions are good. That's not what he's saying. Because we do not believe in reductive agreements. We don't believe in compromises where the church gives some and others give some.
Yeah.
Like
that. Yeah, that's really well
said. The truth
said.
is the truth. And wherever that fullness subsists, our first impulse as humans is figuring out what the truth is. If the truth were atheism, then you couldn't compromise by saying, well, maybe there's a half a God and no God. If atheism were true, there would be no God. So it's
Right.
not really like there's a half truth in between. I mean, anyone can believe that you can't really compromise with the truth, because the truth either is or it isn't.
Yes.
And yes, there's room for a lot of nuance, because the truth is necessarily nuanced, but at the end of the day, the truth is the truth. So it depends on that journey that Pope Francis was talking about, that journey of grace from the grace that comes from he who is truth itself. And who better to trust than truth himself?
Yeah. I feel like people have taken a lot of advantage of Pope Francis's pontificate. Like, for some reason, they decided he's the Pope that is we're going to watch everything he says, and we're going to take it to mean as close to what we're looking for him to say as possible. Like, we're going to pick out his words and we're going to trumpet them and say, oh, look, he just confirmed this is okay, and he justified this and that. It's like, well, if you're looking for that, you will find what you're looking for. You will just make something look like justification for you, even if it isn't. Like that quote that you just read of his, you can't understand that to mean, like you said, that everything is equal or good and that we should compromise. And so, yeah, but if people are saying that Pope Francis is making statements like that, then they're looking for something that isn't there. They're misrepresenting him, which has happened so many times. Yeah, it's like whenever people ask me about the Pope, I'm like, you have to go and listen to him word for word himself. Don't go to some interview where they only have excerpts of what he said. Like, go find the original news release or whatever's on the Vatican that tells you everything he did say, because I've never found that to disappoint. I've always
don't even watch this video. Don't even watch this video. Go look at the actual primary source.
Yes, right. Like, you could do this all on your own. We're just trying to kind of feed it to you a little bit, make it a little bit easier. Yeah. Because like you said, when I first went to read the papers, you said, well, it's not really like, oh, I wrote them. You're like, I put them together. It's just all these quotes and excerpts from all these documents, and I organized them into a cohesive, thing. And I was like, well, yeah, and you do. And so there's very little of actual you talking in there. But when you do have your little interjections to kind of tie things together or restate something to clarify it, I found those really helpful. They really did. Because sometimes I get lost. I'm in there reading the popes and I'm like, wow, this is great. But some of that antiquated language can kind of get your head spinning and you're like, that sounded good. What was that? And then you kind of come in, you're like, so, this is what he said. And you're like, good. And then you move on, you go to the next thing. So that was really good, just to tie it all together. So yay, Tony. Go, Tony. All right. Do you have any more quotes you want to share on ecumenism, or do you want to talk about religious liberty now?
Moving on to the next thing, I'm ready to go on to religious liberty if you want.
Let's go.
The big one.
Religious liberty. Set us adrift here.
The big one, the mountain, the one that everybody loves talking about in this discussion. That is a huge one for the society. I think they said it was one of maybe two things that was a sticking point for reconciliation with Rome. Reconciliation? Can I say that?
Okay.
I think I can.
You're good.
But yeah, essentially it just comes down to like what you mean by freedom and liberty. When Father McDonald was doing his video, he pointed out again that liberty is a precious gift from God, which can be embraced or abused. To choose what is objectively good and in accord with God's will is the right way to exercise that freedom. And the abuse of freedom is always wrong because it opposes God, the supreme good, and that man has the duty to choose the true religion revealed by God, who can neither deceive nor be deceived. And he, again, contrasted it with modernism, which believed that liberty is basically a free-for-all, where you basically do whatever you want because, well, the primacy of human conscience, as opposed to God, is the ultimate arbiter of good versus evil. And I know a lot of people who would probably rely on conscience too much to justify doing the wrong thing, because it's like, it's my conscience, my decision, as it were. And you'll find everyone from all stripes of whatever belief or whatever ideology or whatever politics who will make that justification. But again, the word a lot of different things. It could be like the time period, it could mean the philosophy. So we have to even clarify how we're using the word modern before we get into that. And I think the clarification of terms is dreadfully lacking from the traditionalist discourse versus other Catholics these days. I think there's a shortage of defining our terms. And I think that's really at the heart of this debate right here. Because there's really only one document that's at the heart of all of this, Dignitatis Humanae, the Declaration on Religious Liberty. Gaudium et Spes touches on it a little bit, and Ad Gentis and Christus Dominus basically repeat what you find in Dignitatis Humanae and Gaudium et Spes. So I don't think you really have to look at those decrees to really get the meat of what Vatican II speaks about. If you read nothing else, read Dignitatis Humanae and Gaudium et Spes if you want what Vatican II says about religious liberty.
Okay.
And speaking of Dignitatis Humanae, it's actually interesting. The Society's Frequently Asked Question video mentioned that Lumen Gentium introduced a new notion on the liberty of worship and conscience and the concept of liberty. Lumen Gentium doesn't actually touch on it. I don't know if they meant a different document. But
I accidentally said the wrong one, or yeah,
perhaps. I mean, I'm not going to read malice into Father McDonald's statements there. That would make me a hypocrite, and I don't like doing that. But again, I think that at the very least, it shows a little bit of carelessness with the presentation. And I think that if you are going to teach that an official magisterial document teaches error, you kind of need to do your due diligence before you go out stating that these documents are teaching error. And I think 99.999% of the problems would be solved if people read these documents. And I'm not just talking about the Society. Catholics in general need to read them, because I see a lot of Catholics make some really bizarre statements about what Vatican II teaches or doesn't teach.
Yeah. From hearsay. It just doesn't pay to take things from hearsay.
That's why we have the text to rely on, so that we don't have to do that.
Right. And now we really don't have an excuse, because we have the internet, so we can get to everything we need. I mean, almost everybody, at least, okay, in first world countries, everybody can access the internet. But
I mean, if you want to spend money, you can get the Word on Fire Vatican II collection, parts 1 and 2. They're not paying me for this one, but I'm going to give it a shout anyway, because I love the commentary in those books. But yeah, I mean, they're available for free on the Vatican's website. That's basically where I copied them into Word and took notes on them. Not distributing them for sale, I promise. Don't want to run all of copyright laws.
Oh, man.
But anyway, I digress. So yeah, a Dignitatis Humanae, it talks about the sense that it talks about humans, for starters. It doesn't talk about the truth itself. It talks about humans, about people, and that there is a sense of dignity inherent in every human being, and that's been increasingly aware of in our time, because slavery was starting to fade as an institution, and the civil rights movement was taking off. All were major indications that there is something inherent in every human being that deserves respect, because we're made in the image and likeness of God. And Lumen Gentium goes on to say that with an eye towards sacred tradition and doctrine, the Church declares that God has revealed the proper manner of worship in which lies our salvation. The proper manner of worship is found whole in the Catholic Church. Seeing that again, the proper manner of worship is found in the Catholic Church, to which Jesus committed to it and all of its members to make disciples of all nations. So if there's an accusation that this ruins the evangelic impulse of the Church, I would say, please go back and read that paragraph again. Slowly, carefully this time. Turn in every word, season it with salt and pepper, and turn it around in your mouth so that you take in the entire statement. And it also says that all men are thus bound to seek the truth. I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what it says. all men are bound to seek the truth, especially concerned with God and his church, to embrace the truth and hold fast to it. These obligations are binding on our human conscience. So we cannot claim willful ignorance. That won't be acceptable. Invincible ignorance, sure. I mean, I will probably die being ignorant of 90% of what the church teaches. I mean, I've read the entire catechism, and I probably still will die not knowing 90% of what the church teaches. But I'm still bound to try to understand it.
Yeah.
And like, if it turns out that the church is not true, then I would be forced to look somewhere else. Mm-hmm. But so far, I've read nothing that would shake that notion for me. So the truth is the truth. I mean, that's what we're called to do. And that's what Dignitas Humanae says, that we are bound to follow it wherever it goes. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, and the document goes on to say, the truth cannot impose itself except by virtue of its own truth. Basically, the truth defends itself. So it doesn't necessarily need too much help. I mean, we evangelize, but by virtue of it being the truth, if people are honestly searching for it, it has a way of making itself known. Mm-hmm. Because it isn't necessarily through our efforts that we convert, that anybody becomes a Catholic or a Christian or whatever the truth is, but it is by the grace of God that it happens. And God does not need help, but he delights in using us as secondary means for people to discover it. So all we have to do is live our Christian witness and trust that the truth will speak for itself. Mm-hmm. And therefore, men require religious freedom, which is defined, this is important here because it's important, religious freedom defined in this document is freedom from coercion in civil society in order to carry out their duty to worship God. So as you can see, it is not saying we don't have a duty to God. It's not saying that we can do whatever we want. It is saying exactly what traditional Catholicism teaches, that we are bound to follow God who is truth.
Yes.
The document is not contradicting that. Mm-hmm. It even says that the document, because it's not touching on those things, it leaves intact the traditional understanding of men's duty of the truth, and that the fact that the Catholic Church possesses the fullness of truth. So right there, it is precluding reading the idea of a modernist idea of liberty. You cannot read it into it because the document specifically says you cannot.
Oh, man. Yep. I love it.
If you want further proof, I can read a relevant section word for word if you want. Where it says. It's toward the end, but it's important because everyone needs to know it. Mm-hmm. In the formation of their consciences, the Christian faithful ought carefully to attend to the sacred and certain doctrine of the Church. It claims that the Church's doctrine is sacred and certain. For the Church is, by the will of Christ, the teacher of the truth. It is her duty to give utterance to, and authoritatively to teach, that truth which is Christ himself, and also to declare and confirm by her authority those principles of the moral order which have their origins in human nature itself. Furthermore, let Christians walk in wisdom in the face of those outside, in the Holy Spirit, and unaffected love in the word of truth. So we are still bound to live out our Christian witness. Mm-hmm. The disciple, I'm skipping ahead here to section 14. Mm-hmm. The disciple is bound by a grave obligation toward Christ, his master, ever more fully to understand the truth received from him, faithfully to proclaim it, and vigorously to defend it. Never be it understood, having recourse to means that are incompatible with the spirit of the gospel. So again, it is precluding a modernist reading of that. And if there's any confusion on that, it's really only because section 14 was not read clearly enough.
Mm-hmm. Right. So that, and that the brief little definition you read earlier about, freedom, that the human person by their innate dignity basically is entitled to freedom in civil society to practice their religion. And it's like, that's very specific. Freedom in civil society. So they're just saying basically today, at least with the governments and the world the way it is, and now this is a concern where it wasn't when we were full to the brim of Catholic monarchies that were, always like backing up the faith basically in what they were doing and how they were passing down the law. So now that's not the case anymore. So they're saying that these governments, whoever they are, wherever they are, need to allow men to be free to practice their religion according to what they believe they need to be doing. And exactly. that makes the Catholic Church free to do what she's doing. But they're saying everyone deserves that because the state should not be stopping people from doing, from their religious practices. Am I getting that right?
Yes. And Gaudium et Spes even says that the church has the right to do her role, which is to spread the truth and preach the gospel to all peoples. And that the church has, the state has to respect that right because there's a right duly given to the church herself. Okay. And none of this is new. Here's the real kicker here. The idea of religious liberty that Dignitas Humanae defines was actually endorsed previously. We can look at Pope Leo XIII. In the very documents that the Society cites to claim that Vatican II teaches error, here's something that Pope Leo XIII says in those very documents. Take Libertas Praesanctissimum, which says, "But it may also be taken to mean that every man in the state may follow the will of God and from a consciousness of duty and free from every obstacle obey his commands. This indeed is true liberty, a liberty worthy of the sons of God, which nobly maintains the dignity of man and is stronger than all violence or wrong, a liberty which the church has always desired and held most dear. This is the kind of liberty the apostles claimed for themselves with intrepid constancy, which the apologists of Christianity confirmed by their writings, and which the martyrs in vast numbers consecrated by their blood." If that is not confirmation, traditional confirmation of what Dignitas Humanae teaches, I do not know what is.
Yes. So can you just illuminate us a little bit more about why the Society thinks that Vatican II is contradicting previous teaching? Where does the confusion come in? Is it about context? Is it about definition of terms, or both? What is that?
I think it's a contextual confusion. I think a lot of it might have to do with Archbishop Lefebvre's background. In his biography that Bishop Tissia de Malarai wrote, he makes a lot about Archbishop Lefebvre's background. He came from a very traditional monarchist family. His father was a very pro-monarchist believer. He believed that the church was a victim to the Enlightenment era and the French Revolution and its ideas of what freedom is. So already you are marinating in that philosophy. So you already have your preconceived idea of what freedom and liberty is because you've been hearing it from the Enlightenment crowd of what they think freedom is. So to then come up to Vatican II and hear the exact same terms being used in Dignitas Humanae, that would be enough, I would think, to give them at least pause. And again, I mean, imagine having witnessed what happened to the Catholic Church in the French Revolution, and then turning around and seeing these kind of terms showing up in the Vatican II documents. I think it would freak anybody out. So
yes, yeah, that's a fair point. It doesn't. I mean, they don't get to just own those terms because they made them their slogan, like the French Revolution did. But yeah, you can see where it's it was near enough to the time that it was kind of yeah, what are we doing? Are we trying to use these words to hold hands with this movement that was clearly unchristian and attacked the church? Yeah, I mean, no, they don't get to just own those words because, they're using the same thing. But yeah, so the church is almost taking them back and saying, we get to use these words too. And this is what they really mean.
Yeah, because it puts it in that Catholic context of how
that's really helpful.
The biblical Catholic understanding of liberty.
Okay.
I mean, there are other things that you could say about Dignitas Humanae if you really want a fuller deep dive into it. Father Brian Harrison, if you type in Father Brian Harrison religious liberty in any Google search engine or whatever search engine you use, you'll find a pretty good treatment of religious liberty as defined by Vatican II.
Cool.
It's all there. I would highly recommend reading it because that's basically the argument that I relied on because it made the most sense. But ultimately, I feel like a lot of confusion arises not from the Vatican II documents themselves, because lest we forget, Archbishop Lefebvre signed every single one. So if he had a problem with it, it was not, if he had a problem with any of the documents, it was not with their texts, because he signed them all.
Right.
They had the opportunity to withhold their signatures, but he still signed them. And it was speculated that he did so because, you know, he was still very much a faithful son of the church. And he's like, you know what? I will put my trust in the church, even though I have misgivings. And he probably did have them. I would not blame him if he did, given his background. So he probably like, I'm going to trust the church. And I think the tipping point was after the council had ended, after it had all wrapped up, and all the craziness took off. I did not live through the craziness. I was born after that time. But I think if you talk to anybody from that era, you will hear a lot of mad stories about what the spirit of Vatican II supposedly taught or not. I mean, imagine seeing all this and hearing all this, and it makes you want to go back and be like, what did I sign? What is in here that is causing all this craziness? And people want to look for connections. That's what humans do. They look for connections, no matter how thin or far-fetched, to explain what is going wrong. And as we know, correlation does not equal causation. It's the post hoc fallacy that Brandon Bond, others have pointed out, that is the ultimate fallacy when talking about the problems that happened after Vatican II. Just because there were problems after Vatican II does not mean Vatican II was the cause itself. But it's kind of hard to keep that in mind when you see all this craziness happening. So my guess, I don't know the man, again. For one thing, I wouldn't be able to talk to him because he spoke French. Maybe he speak English, I don't know. Maybe I heard
he did some. Yeah, I've heard a recording of him giving a homily in English. So at least he could do that.
Yeah. I mean, like, I imagine he looked at all this and was like, what did I just buy? It's almost like buyer's remorse. What did I buy that is causing all of this? I now want to reject it because I am seeing the consequences play out.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when you throw all of that in context, and he had voices in the society's founding that were also kind of maybe like guiding his idea behind that, because he tended to surround himself with more extreme people than him, like the ghostwriter of the Ottaviani intervention. I'm totally blanking on his name. If I think of it, I'll tell. Give me a second here. I actually want to figure out what this is.
Can't leave it.
No, I will not. I cannot.
That's true. Like, who you surround yourself with, it can either moderate you, balance you out, or it can amplify certain things that you're already displaying or tending towards in not a good way, and help you, well, prevent you from being helped, basically. Just make you unbalanced. So that, that is... Okay.
It was Father Gerald de Laurier. I'm totally butchering the French. I apologize.
Oh, yes.
But yeah, he was the ghostwriter of the Ottaviani intervention, one of, I think, 12 writers and theologians who put that together. And when you read some of his correspondence with Archbishop Lefebvre, it's easy to see that he was probably more extreme than Archbishop Lefebvre was, because he was laying into Archbishop Lefebvre for celebrating the new Mass. And I mean, Michael Lofton and John Salza both talked about that Archbishop Lefebvre celebrated the new Mass at some point, probably trying to maintain that connection with the church. But you have people like Father de Laurier who were telling him, like, you are offending God by celebrating the new Mass. You are doing this, you are doing that, and really laying into him. And I believe that Father de Laurier taught at the Econ Seminary before he left the society. I think he became a sedevacantist. But I mean, imagine surrounding yourself with people like that who are constantly stoking your anxieties, who are constantly claiming that the church is falling apart around you. And I mean, Archbishop Lefebvre was an archbishop. He had the standing to make a better statement than any one of his seminarians or advisors probably could. So they probably really lay into him because they felt like he was kind of a figurehead they could rally around. Because, I mean, you have an archbishop who had a great reputation for building up the church in Africa, was an assistant at the papal throne, helped prepare the Vatican II documents, and by all accounts, a brilliant understanding of what the Catholic Church taught. So I think that for him, he just saw all this happening, and based on the advice of the people he was surrounding himself with, I mean, after a while, I mean, you just, you know, you start seeing things in these documents that weren't meant to be there, but you know, they're there now, and you have to do something about it. So imagine having, it's almost like sensory overload, but in a traditional Catholic sort of sense. I mean, what are you supposed to do with that?
Right. Except that the traditional Catholic approach is to let the church interpret her magisterium for herself and not to take that on yourself. So it's weird, even with as brilliant as Lefebvre was, as faithful as he had been, he really lost sight of, I mean, like we've said over and over in these videos, it's like his own term, the experiment of tradition. Let us try the experiment of tradition. It's like, wait, tradition isn't an experiment. It's tried and true. Like, that's why you guys are saying we should do all this stuff, because we've been doing it for so long. Like, it's proved itself. Well, the proven approach is to trust the church, because the original sin, as the Catechism teaches, was fundamentally a lack of trust in God. So that's his original sin, if you will. You're looking at this going, he first chose to trust the church and sign the documents, and then later he decides to go back and question the very thing that should be giving him security, that he should be finding his assurance in. He's like, oh wait, everything is to be questioned. And then, you know, the ground is shaking beneath his feet, and he feels like it's up to me to save the church, because everybody's telling him, you know, they're rallying around him, like you said, and it's very deafening, and then it's kind of enthralling. You're like, wow, people are looking to me, and they're, you know, it's like, you know, him offering mass out in a field with hundreds and thousands of people, and, you know, sorry, hundreds and thousands, not hundreds of thousands, but, you know, like saying, you know, that, you know, we're here for you. We're coming to you because you're giving us what the rest of the church won't give us. And it's like, well, that would be kind of hard to just turn and walk away from. I mean, it would require a saint, basically, to not have their head turned by that.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the argument, is like, well, was he or wasn't he? But
yeah, I think when he said the experiment of tradition, I think basically he was seeing everyone else experimenting with it. And I think he was kind of using it as a way to essentially say, well, everyone else is experimenting. Why don't we experiment with something that is tried and true to show that we are right? And obviously, again, it's kind of like that whole, like, if you can't beat them, join them, which I think was probably the wrong way to go. I mean, that's kind of why I read the society's position on collegiality, and I draw a massive blank as to how it makes sense, because and in their negotiations with Cardinal Ratzinger, later Pope Benedict XVI, they were talking about like how we want a majority of members from tradition, the capital T, on this council to determine the fate of the society. But I mean, it's that very idea of collegiality that they were trying to rail against in these documents. So on the one hand, they were fighting collegiality, or rather, I should say conciliarism. There's a difference between the two. Conciliarism is the idea that a council made up of the church can override the Pope on things, whereas proper collegiality understands that you can't do anything without the Pope, because the Pope is the head. It's like, imagine my body trying to do something without my head. It's not going to do much other than just lie on the floor and do nothing.
Yeah.
But the idea is that I think he just saw all these other people doing it. It's like, well, maybe we can use this to kind of prove that this was all a mistake. But it was a flawed premise to begin with, because that's not what the church taught in Vatican II. So he was unintentionally committing the same mistakes that all the people he was criticizing around him were doing too, experimenting, claiming that we should have a say in how the Pope does things, and it should be a majority of our people deciding how it works. And you can see why Cardinal Ratzinger and St. John Paul II turned around and were like, you do realize that in our agreement, the society's survival is guaranteed by the Pope. It's not determined by a council. And if that argument sounds familiar, it's because the society made it in their arguments against collegiality by saying that the church doesn't run by a council. It runs from the Pope and the bishops in communion with him. There's a hierarchy involved here that precludes the members from operating on their own without being in concert with the rest of the church.
Okay, that's good. So this is a good segue into collegiality. I did have a question about religious liberty, but we can come back.
Go ahead. We can touch on that quickly. Before
okay, good. Because so I think I don't feel like we've really touched on this, but I think the issue that a lot of people have with the religious liberty thing is that they're concerned that saying that men should be free to practice their religion, whatever it is again like boiling all religions down to they're all equally good. The state shouldn't get in the way of that. And, maybe even the church shouldn't get in the way of that. Who's to say, who are we to say that any man who wants to practice any religion, even if it's idol worship, child sacrifice, whatever. I mean, if you want to go really extreme, should be able to go ahead and do that. That somehow the idea of religious liberty in the Vatican II documents is sort of opening the door to that kind of thing, like, or saying that, and then that creates, like, traditionalists seem to want some assurance that the church is always going to teach that the church should be the religion of every state. Basically, the Catholic Church should be the foremost, ideally, and that, yes, of course, there should be liberty for Catholics to practice, but what about everybody else? They're wrong. Why should we be promoting their having liberty to practice? How can that really be true or right, in accordance with the natural law and man's duty-bound conscience to pursue God in all truth, which is found in the Catholic Church? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, I can quote from the Bible here and basically say they have Moses and the prophets. Look to them. I mean, if we believe that the church will not contradict dogma, then we have to believe that anything in the past, as Pope Benedict said, is true and good, that the church has always taught is true in the past as well. So we can't be constantly facing inward, just always referencing the same rule book that we always have, because everything in that rule book is built on a smaller version of itself as the Holy Spirit has been unpacking the church throughout the centuries. I'll probably touch more on this later in my conclusion, but I mean, if you really believe that the church is not going to err in such a catastrophic way as to endanger souls, then you have to offer up your concerns to God, as it were. And I am putting my trust in the church because Jesus said that the gates of hell would not fall against it. And I'll build on this later. Did I answer your question?
Well, actually you did. I think you did, but it was you didn't so much address the particular thing that I mentioned as the foundation of before we get anxious about the church saying something that's wrong or promoting a dangerous idea, we just have really what you said was a better answer because it's more fundamental. It's like, everybody chill, because the church is not going to lead you astray. Even the ordinary magisterium is protected by the Holy Spirit because the faithful are led by it, and we're supposed to give our dutiful assent to it and conform ourselves to that teaching. So even if it's not, specifically infallible, extraordinary magisterial teaching, it's like not all the documents of Vatican II are. I mean, there are some dogmatic constitutions, but not all of them are. Some of them are just decrees or, I'm sorry, I'm spacing it. Oh, wow. Anyway,
they touch on issues of discipline and governance.
Yes.
Which, if we recall from Vatican I, taught that the Pope has the right to govern the governance and disciplines of the church. And that includes the liturgy itself, which Pius XII touched on in Mystici Corpus, Mediator Dei.
Oh, good. Cool. Okay, yes. So even in that, we have to allow ourselves to be led by the church. We are the sheep. And that's something totally legitimate that the church is doing. She did not overstep any bounds. And so that's what you have to reassure people. It's like God is directing this. The Holy Spirit wrote those documents through the hands of those bishops. And I mean, thousands of bishops, like we've never had convened in the history of the church, so many at one time. And it's like, you know, even that document on the liturgy, you think that would have been more controversial, and only 4 bishops did not sign it. Yeah. Out of all those thousands. It's like, okay, wow, that's pretty good. How could something so almost completely unanimous be brought about other than by the working of the Holy Spirit? I mean, no, it doesn't make any sense. So, okay, thank you, Tony. That was good. So you're right.
Hope that answered everything that you were thinking about. And let's see, collegiality is the final one. And as we touched on it, that Father McDonald started off his video by saying that the truth seeks and defends the primacy of God's objective reality, and that the universe is created with a hierarchical order reflected in the organization of the church. And that the bishops also exercise immediate jurisdiction over their own diocese, subject only to the Pope's authority and intervention. I don't know if that's quite the right reading of the church's conception of hierarchy, because when you read Vatican I, Pastor Aeternus, it specifically says in there that the bishops are not subordinates of the Pope. Like, it's not like a department where you have the CEO and then your department's under the CEO. It's not quite like that. It specifically says that the bishops have an authority that's all their own, and that they share in that papal authority as long as they're connected to that authority. I think John Salza had a wonderful example of this when he was talking about the difference between papal primacy and papal authority, because the bishops share in authority, but not in primacy.
Right. So well, just the fact that they're all bishops, even the Pope. Like when I was a kid and I finally figured that out, I'm like, oh, the Pope is just a bishop? Like I thought Pope was an office above, but it's not. It's setting him apart from the rest, as, you know, because he has to be, you know, the final arbiter. He is the vicar of Christ on earth, like, you know, in a particular sense, but he's really on the same level. There's no ordination above bishop.
Yeah.
You know,
the reason that papal primacy comes in is if there's a dispute. And it's almost like an umpire, almost, where you're trying to decide between ball and strike, but the umpire has the final word. No matter how much the players bicker at each other, the umpire is the one who calls you out. So
that's a good analogy.
It's like the flawless umpire. We know he's never going to call someone who's out safe or someone who's safe out.
Yes.
So
and that's not to say that, like,
he might be an awful human being, but he's not going to make a bad call on the field, basically.
Oh, okay. That's good. Well, and I mean, in the past too, we had the Pope was also a king of the 7 papal states, you know, and so then he wore the crown and all these things that were like a lot more emphasis made on him being a monarch and, you know, over things. And that was a much more established and recognized model. And now monarchies are kind of more rare. And that some people are having an issue with, like, the Pope's not wearing all the things he used to wear and standing himself out more. It's like the Pope is just becoming like treating the church like a democracy, or everybody's going to forget that he's really primal, and, you know, and that he's just going to look like everybody else and act like everybody else. And it's just not going to be special anymore. Like, the Pope is special. We got to emphasize that. It's like, yes, he is special, but maybe it's just shifting, but I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. And the Pope isn't trying to get attention for himself in the way he once had it, because it wouldn't be appropriate at this time in history anymore to do that.
And I can even build on that, because I think that there's so much conception that the monarchy is a temporal power, and we believe that the Pope is a spiritual power. And I think a lot of people were starting to confuse the two. And as we clearly read in the Bible, like, the Pope is supposed to be the servant of servants. The bishops are supposed to be the servants of servants as well, to model Christ. Like he was saying that the Gentiles and the Pharisees lord it over others, but it's not going to be with you. You are going to be everyone's servant. So when you have a Pope who is dressed in regal attire and, by all accounts, by all appearances anyway, lording his status over everyone else. It kind of creates a contradiction with what the church actually teaches about the proper role of the bishops. So in my unlearned opinion, I think it was just kind of that way of re-emphasizing that the Pope is not a temporal leader. He is a spiritual leader, and temporal authority only in the sense that it pertains to the church's visible hierarchy and its visible apparatus. So temporal in that sense, but not of this world. So if we want to emphasize that the Pope is a servant of servants, you don't really get that point across very well with regal attire. And if you need that regal attire to know that the Pope is the Pope, then I think you're kind of taking the wrong lessons from Catholicism, basically.
Yes. That's cool. Okay. Thank you.
Personal note.
No, good.
But yes, again, that faulty reading of the church's natural hierarchy aside, he was stating that what did he say? That
Father McDonald was stating.
Yeah, Father McDonald. He was claiming that Lumen Gentium was proposing that the bishops should rule as peers with the Pope, that it was diluting the church's authority within its governance and destroying the authority of the Pope over the bishops and priests, basically flipping everything upside down and making the laity in charge of the church. Honestly, just reading Lumen Gentium, and it's like, there's not really any window dressing here. Everything that they said right there is absolutely not what Vatican II said.
Yeah, that one was very open and shut. Like you said, I mean, I went through all your quotations and I was like, wow, yeah, I don't know where they got that.
Yeah.
Really no clue.
Let's see, what does it actually say? I can put the highlights here.
Go ahead. Lay it on us.
Yeah. I am looking at Lumen Gentium right now.
It's coming.
Okay. Yeah, chapter 3. The bishop, like the college or the body of bishops, has no authority unless it is understood together with the Roman pontiff, the successor of Peter as its head. The Pope's power primacy over all, both pastors and faithful, remains whole and intact. Again, it's kind of hard to look at that and dismiss it as window dressing when it's kind of the heart and soul of the teaching here.
Yeah, and it's repeated multiple times in various ways, if I remember right. From all those
frequently throughout that passage.
Yeah, it just goes on and on and on and on, over and over.
I could go on. In virtue of his office, that is, as vicar of Christ and pastor of the whole church, the Roman pontiff has full, supreme, and universal power over the church, and he is always free to exercise this power. Again, kind of hard to read that and think that the church is teaching a democratized model of hierarchy that the society is condemning. So, again, I don't know why this was condemned as window dressing. It's very clearly not window dressing. It's not like it's a footnote or a tiny passage slipped in there to ease the consciences of certain people. It's clearly a heart and soul paragraph.
Yes.
And again,
the teaching on collegiality, that was prefaced by Vatican I. Like that got to address the Pope, but it meant to further address the College of Bishops and all of that. Oh, and they even define the term college. You go into that in the paper. That's really good about what is understood by college and why that's not, putting everybody on the same level. And that was really helpful too. But yeah, that was meant to be addressed by Vatican I, but Vatican I got sort of abbreviated because of the war. So they closed it and they just put that on the shelf for later. And then that was revisited. Then Vatican II was finally able to address it and complete that teaching. But it's really part of the teaching about the papal primacy and stuff.
Exactly. And even in Vatican I, during that section, they talk about the bishops. I can even quote it. Chapter 3, section 5 of Pastor Aeternus. This power of the Supreme Pontiff by no means detracts from the ordinary and immediate power of episcopal jurisdiction by which bishops, who have succeeded to the place of the apostles by appointment of the Holy Spirit, tend and govern individually the particular flocks which have been assigned to them. On the contrary, this power of theirs is asserted, supported, and defended by the supreme and universal pastor. For St. Gregory the Great, says, "My honor is the honor of the whole church. My honor is the steadfast strength of my brethren. Then do I receive true honor, which is denied to none, to those of whom honor is due." And Pope Leo XIII, although they do not receive plenary or universal or supreme authority, they are not to be looked on as vicars of the Roman pontiffs, because they exercise a power really their own and are most truly called the ordinary pastors of the peoples over whom they rule. So already the society's understanding of the traditional concept of hierarchy is a bit flawed, because that's not exactly what the church taught before Vatican II. But even after Vatican II, it doesn't go whole hog in the opposite direction either, because as we looked at chapter 3, it maintains the primacy of Peter, and that papal authority cannot be exercised unless you are united to your head. So again, it can't be window dressing, because these are salient points that have been made long before Vatican II and will probably be made long after. I mean, even our current Pope, Pope Francis.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, because then you mentioned the concept of synodality, which they kind of roll into it like, look, and here's more proof that the church is becoming a democracy, because they want to listen to all the people and let the people decide what's going to happen, and that's not what's really going on.
Exactly. He even says in Episcopalis Communio, which was 2018, he said, in the church, the purpose of any collegial body, whether consultative or deliberative, is always the search for the truth or the good of the church. When it is therefore a question involving the faith itself, the consensus ecclesiae is not determined by the tallying of votes, but is the outcome of working of the Spirit, the soul of the one church of Christ. And there are others, but that is the main one that I cited in there.
Yeah, no, that's good, because it explains that the synodality approach, it's like hearing everyone. Again, it's like being open to listening to the whole church, and letting the Holy Spirit use that to kind of paint the picture of where he's trying to take you. Not that you just go, oh, the people said this, therefore we're just going to move on that. Like, you know, the Pope and the bishops are not the appointed representatives of the people that have to do what the people tell them to do. That's never been the case. But they're like, the church is seeking wisdom, and by listening to everyone wherever they are and seeing what the Holy Spirit is showing them through that, and then they discern it, and then the bishops and the Pope decide where and what to move on. So that doesn't sound like a problem to me. It sounds like a healthy family dynamic. Yeah. Because even your kids, I mean, children have wisdom and they have a perspective that is their own, and it's valuable. If you just acted like children should be seen and not heard at all times, well, you're not gonna parent very well, and you're never gonna really understand what's going on with your kids, because you're always blowing them off. You're like, you don't have anything to teach me. I don't need to listen to you. What you think doesn't matter. What you're experiencing doesn't matter. That would be terrible. So yeah, and I mean, I want my kids to learn how to stand up to me when the time requires it. Obviously, like, I would hope that they respect me as their dad, but I want them to be willing to stand up to me and challenge me. I don't want them to be afraid for them to tell me that they think I'm wrong. I want them to be able to tell me that. And I want them to be free to tell me when they think I'm overstepping my bounds. And a healthy family dynamic is when you listen to your kids and you kind of make the course corrections for their benefit too, and for your own as well, because it makes you a better parent and makes them a better kid. I mean, I know there have been a lot of complaints about the pontificate, about how Pope Francis is not pastoral enough toward traditionalists. And I mean, we can go 12 rounds over whether Traditionis Custodes was too much or too little. Yeah. And I don't know. I think that maybe it could have been a little lighter. I don't know. I don't know what was read that prompted Traditionis Custodes, but at the same time, obviously, I feel like the Pope saw enough to know that there was a very serious problem going on and he had to act. I feel awful because it impacts people I know, and I hate
seeing their faith challenged to such a degree because of what they see as a direct assault on their faith.
Yeah.
I feel like I could never properly reassure them that, their faith wasn't under attack, because for so long, like, they associate the traditional Latin Mass with the faith itself. So when they see the traditional Latin Mass attacked, they see the faith in general being attacked. And it's like, what do you say? Because anything you say, it almost sounds callous, almost, when you say it's no big deal. It's almost like saying your Catholic faith is no big deal, I feel like. But at the same time...
Right. You're being very sensitive to them.
Yeah.
But it's also a call to go deeper and to, ask the question, is this form of the Mass the substance of my faith? Is it really being so threatened? Because you can sit there and just say it or feel it. Oh my gosh, like, wow, yes. And we can feel for people that are experiencing that, but we don't want to leave them there, because we know that there's more to the story and we don't want them to be missing out on that. It's like, this is an invitation to go deeper into your faith and to ask those questions and find those answers, because you don't have to be shaken to your core because you can't have access to the 1962 missal or whatever it may be. And that's actually God giving you an opportunity. It's not him just giving you the smackdown, or a chastisement until you repent and then he'll give it back to you. It's like, we don't know what his big picture is in this, but yeah, we don't, there can be a loving response, but there can be an enabling response too.
Yeah.
We don't want to do that.
Exactly.
So.
Is there anything else you wanted to talk about collegiality?
Oh, well, collegiality, I feel like you pretty much covered that, but I loved your conclusion and what you were, the closing remarks that you would make about that. I want to make sure we get to that.
Yeah. Those remarks pretty much cover all of it, really. What does it say? That the teaching of the church isn't considered authentic unless made in communion with its magisterium. So, in the course of a lot of these arguments, the common trend that I'm finding here is that they are depending on reading agendas into these words a lot. When you're seeing the Catholicism as you know it fall apart around you, you kind of feel like you have to look for explanations beyond the documents. But the problem is that all of those figures claiming that the spirit of Vatican II, that famous argument, all those figures talking about it, all the ones who are ushering in these wild reforms and all these crazy ideas, and the ones who attacked Archbishop Lefebvre for being a traditionalist, all these people, well, they are not the authority principle, because, well, they're obviously not operating in union with Pope St. Paul VI. And say what you want about how Pope St. Paul VI, like whether he should have done more, but it was clear from at least what he said that he was decrying liturgical abuses. And every pope between him and Francis have condemned abuses. You can, again, go another 12 rounds over whether they do enough to combat liturgical abuses. And I will always be the first one to say, like, I'd always love to see more. But at the end of the day, you have to read their intentions first before you condemn them for leading the church off the guardrail of tradition. So we should only ever consider the documents in concert with papal authorities and the bishops in communion with them. We should always look at that first before we consider whether they're teaching error or not. And because that's the authority that's protected from committing error. If you are Catholic and you buy into the idea. Right. And I think the other point I would make is that, at the end of the day, anyone can accept the teachings of the Catholic Church. Some are harder for some people than others, but I think you can find plenty of people who will take it whole hog because their faith is important enough to them that they would do it. Every teaching that people have problems with today, whether it's abortion, contraception, or LGBTQ movement, and the liturgy, and the Pope, and things like that. All these challenging things, you can probably accept all of them if you work really hard enough. I know I have a couple of of things that, I kind of struggle with. As far as you will not find one Catholic. I challenge you to find one Catholic who does not struggle with at least one church teaching. You will not find one. I struggle with a few. Everyone struggles with a few.
Yeah.
So, but ultimately, you can probably find someone who will accept all of them without question. It's hard, but not impossible to do. What seems to be impossible, like, okay, you accept the church's teachings, but do you accept the teacher? And what I'm seeing a lot of is they're picking teachings to accept, but because they're rejecting the teacher, they are not following the church. I mean, it's even in the Bible. I mean, the rich young man who said, Lord, I've followed every single commandment to the letter my entire life. I've done all these things. What must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus, looking at him, loving him, said, well, you lack one thing. Go sell all you have to the poor so that you may have riches in heaven, then come follow me. So it's like, for all the teachings that this rich young man accepted, he really, what he couldn't do was accept the teacher at that time. And went away sad because he had a lot of possessions. It's like, my teacher is telling me to do something and I feel like I can't do that. Even though I accepted all the teachings that have been handed to me, I can't accept the teaching looking at me in the face right now because I feel like it's too much. And the church is a teacher. And John Henry Newman, I love going back to that well because I love him. He's one of my favorite saints. He went on quite a bit about this in his work. What was it called? An essay in Aid to a Grammar of Assent. And he said, and I'm going to quote the whole paragraph because it's really worth quoting the thing in its entirety. He said, a man is converted to the Catholic Church from its admiration of its religious system and his disgust with Protestantism. That admiration remains, but after a time, he leaves his new faith, perhaps returns to his old. The reason, if we may conjecture, may sometimes be this. He has never believed in the Church's infallibility. In her doctrinal truth he has believed, but in her infallibility, no. He was asked, before he was received, whether he held all that the Church taught. He replied he did, but he understood the question to mean whether he held those particular doctrines, which at the time the Church in matter of fact formally taught. Whereas it really meant whatever the Church then or at any future time should teach. Thus, he never had the indispensable and elementary faith of a Catholic, and was simply no subject for reception into the fold of the Church. This being the case, when the Immaculate Conception is defined, he feels that it is something more than he bargained for when he became a Catholic, and accordingly, he gives up his religious profession. The world will say that he has lost his certitude of the divinity of the Catholic faith, but he never had it.
Wow. That's awesome. What a summing up.
I feel like I see this a lot from traditionalists, conservatives, liberals, I mean, from every aspect of the church. Like, even if they accept every single church teaching at the time they get confirmed, they're going along merrily, and then they run into the church handing them a new teaching, entirely traditional, but at the same time new.
Yes.
We were promised that the Holy Spirit will reveal all truths in time. So right now, the church is still unfolding. The Holy Spirit is still in the process of revealing all truth to us.
Right.
And in ways that we in our limited field would never expect. I mean, you said earlier that the church will never stray outside of its bounds, but it loves smashing our boundaries to pieces. It loves doing that. Just when you think you set it up, okay, I'm in a safe space, I have my church, I have my idea of it, I'm comfortable with it, the church will come along with a wrecking ball and smash it to pieces, telling you, you lack one thing. You are lacking in one thing. Pick up your cross and follow me. Are we willing to do that as Catholics? We are cats. We are notoriously hard to herd. But, for God, all things are possible. I mean, do we accept the church as teacher? Do we accept every teaching that she will at some point teach? Because sooner or later, she will teach something that will challenge it. For many people, it was Vatican II. For others, it was a new missal. For others, it may have been like any of these other really hard teachings that they're finding difficult to accept. I know for a lot of Catholics in the 70s, it was Humanae Vitae when Pope St. Paul
Right.
VI.
Well, the Council of Trent, I mean, that was pretty much ignored for a long time afterward. And it was not very welcome. People weren't excited about what came out of Trent. Some people were, but you know, by and large, I mean, it didn't even show up in France. Like that wasn't implemented until like the late 1800s. Yeah. So you're like, wow, you did a good job avoiding that for 300 years. I mean, holy cow. It's not anything new. And like, this is just a great point that you're saying about, do you trust the speaker? Because the church is a living magisterium. It's a living organic, you know, thing. And it's a body with, it's going to keep on, you know, living and handing down things and further illuminating doctrine, the development of doctrine, you know, that God continues to reveal himself through the church. He didn't just stop. So yeah, we can be very comfortable with what came before. We're like, yeah, that's been around. It's collected some dust. I can just go blow the dust off and be like, this is a safe thing. It's not like, that's a record of what has up to now been revealed, but that's not the living teaching. I mean, it's part of what will always be true, but it's not everything. And we have to allow for the fact that we don't know an awful lot about God, that he is still unfolding to us, and that's going to keep going on into eternity once we're in heaven. And we have a better capacity to receive that revelation of himself. Even now, it's like our minds couldn't even contain it. We're limited even by the darkness of sin on our intellect. It's like all the things he would want to teach us about himself now, but he can't, because we're so, you know, handicapped. So he has to take us like these tiny little steps. And even that's too much for us sometimes. You know, if we're going to hang on to all that we have, like Jesus says, sell all your possessions and then come follow me. It's like, what does that translate to us? Give up our preconceived notions, give up our attachments, give up our, you know, our sentiments, our, you know, like, you know, things that we love that were good, but it's like, maybe God is asking you to set that down for now, set something down, maybe to pick up that cross and follow him. Yeah. And maybe that's not something we bargained for.
Yeah. I mean, I had a great point. I promptly lost it, of course. I'm amazed we actually have gone for an hour and a half, and I've been able to maintain a more or less consistent train of thought the entire way through. That's a record for me, I assure you.
Got it on video. It's proof.
Now I don't have to. Yeah, I feel like Indiana Jones is dead. I got it all on video so that I wouldn't have to remember it.
That's great. Thank you so much for taking the time, Tony. I mean, I don't want to cut you off if there's any other concluding remarks you want to add, but
I feel like I could go on and on, but if like I could slip a few more in there, I mean, we can talk about like all the circles and glass walls that the church has broken through in our own lives. Like even back then, I mean, we look at Quo Primum, the document. We can talk about this more when we talk about the Mass, but even back then, when Pope St. Pius V promulgated Quo Primum, which is an eye-opening document when we read the first couple of passages, because it reads a lot like Sacrosanctum Concilium, talking about how we've consulted with experts that came together, researched the Mass, and came together and said that this is our findings. The Pope took those findings into account and said that, you know, we are going to unify this rite with a goal, one of the goals of returning to the original form of worship. So same goal, actually, that Sacrosanctum Concilium and Missale Romanum had too, which was to return to the worship of the early fathers. Right. And I'm sure when St. Pius V suppressed every rite older than a few hundred years, I'm sure a lot of people, it was a hard sell for a lot of people too. I mean, let's not forget the Protestant Reformation was in full swing at that point. And even the Council of Nicaea, I mean, Arianism didn't die with the Council of Nicaea. It persisted for hundreds of years afterward. Yeah. I mean, people like to think that if the church speaks clearly enough, that all error will suddenly be vanquished. Yeah, I can tell a cat to go to the litter box as clearly as I want. That cat will not move. You can lead a cat to the food bowl, but it will not eat it. You can be as clear as you want. Clarity alone does not do it. I mean, we like to think it is, We would like to think that if God suddenly appeared to us and told us like a hard truth, we would take it right away. But
yeah,
again, we forget that we are cats. And we do not accept anything, even if it's staring us right in the face, if we don't like it. No matter how high in authority we go, we resist. We're cats. It's human nature. Humans and cats have a lot in common. Especially
unfortunately.
Huh?
Unfortunately, I'm a dog person too. So.
Yeah, we like to think we're dog people, but we are actually cats. We like to think we're dogs, but we're actually cats.
Yeah, we wish we were like dogs.
Yeah, everyone wishes we were like dogs. I mean, I don't think it's an accident that the word dog is God reversed, because God is always faithful, just like a dog.
Oh my God.
But we are cats, unfortunately. So we're going to scatter, we're going to hiss, and we're going to howl. And maybe every once in a while we'll follow him, but mostly we'll be like, talk to the hand.
Talk to the hand. Oh, man.
Or the paw, I guess, if we want to maintain the
yes.
cat analogy here. But,
oh, man. Well, this has been really great. And I so appreciate your taking the time. I do probably need to get back to my kids.
Yeah.
But if you're wondering why I've been rocking back and forth almost the whole video, it's because I was holding the baby. You knew that, Tony, but everybody else didn't. You're probably like, what's wrong with her? Is she nervous?
I don't have that excuse. I have my own nervous tics, and I don't have any excuse other than they're nervous tics. What can I do?
Oh, all right. Well, you know. Thank you again, Tony. This is great. And I'm excited to do more videos with you. And thank you again for your papers. I encourage everybody to go read them. Go to tradrecovery.com to the resources page. And they are listed there under, I think it's under the Traditionalism and Vatican II section near the top of the page. You can just click them right there and read them, print them, whatever. And yes, so God bless you, Tony. Thank you so much for all your hard work and your time sharing what you found. It's very inspiring. So thank you.
Thank you. God bless you too. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we will see you again next time.
Till then.